A weekend that looked like it produced all kinds of different drama in the Ardennes ended up seeming slightly predictable for Formula 1. Let's talk about the Belgian Grand Prix, let's talk about the sprint weekend, and let's talk about the key storylines from the event. And to start off with, McLaren's weekend was very much predictable. It was a repeat of what happened at Silverstone, in that they were the fastest car on their package. The Red Bull was able to be faster at some points, but it was essentially running Monza spec in terms of the rear wing. So it meant it was okay in the dry, but when the going got tough, when they started to lose grip in qualifying, or when they got wet for the race, it was going to be McLaren in favour. And it ended up being Piastri over Norris as well. And again, it's because I think Piastri is probably the better wet weather driver out of the two. Now, there were some elements that came in later in the race as well. For example, whilst Lando pitted onto hards and Piastri onto mediums, when the crossover happened and the hard became the faster tyre, Lando wasn't able to make the most of it. Part of that was because of, well, for example, Piastri having built up a large enough buffer. Part of it was the undercut. But part of it, and I would say this is a significant part of it, because it also defined the early part of the race, was Lando's own mistakes. I mean, the reason why he loses the lead is because he ends up getting somewhat loose coming out of La Source on the first racing lap of the race. That allows Piastri to get a run, which means he can pass him down the Kemmel into Les Combes. There are a couple more moments like that for Lando, most notably in the closing laps. There was the off of Poo on that cost, 1.2 seconds. There was the lock-up in La Source a few laps later, which cost him 0.6, they said. There was also the thing with a couple of laps to go at La Source, which also, I think, cost him similarly around a second. But the bigger impact was, things like tyre wear. And things like confidence. And those are the things that are going to define this title battle between the McLaren teammates. Is that Lando is a lot more an emotive driver, I would say. The kind of Senna-esque, a sort of 2021 Verstappen. Or a early career McLaren era Hamilton. Piastri is methodical. He is clinical. He is Alain Prost. He is Lewis Hamilton, let's say 2017 to 2020, or Max Verstappen 22 and 23. He's just clinical, methodical, gets it done. Doesn't buckle under pressure. Almightily impressive. Wonderful run, wonderful drive. And it means that Lando has to be on his A game to beat Piastri. It doesn't mean that Piastri is out and out the better driver, but it means that unless something like what happened at Silverstone happens again, it's going to be tough for Lando to beat Oscar. I think it is worth talking about Verstappen as well, because yes, he did lose a pit stop on Piastri by the end of the race, and he was 2 seconds behind Leclerc. He was still 15 seconds clear of George Russell though, and that is impressive. Verstappen is maximising that package week in, week out, and there is really no denying that. Now, Leclerc was working with his Ferrari better than Verstappen was with the Red Bull today. But what Red Bull's having to do now to get any semblance of a title bid together for Verstappen, to try and get him to get that 5 in a row and be the first to have 5 in a row since Schumacher. What they have to do is play to what works well for the car. So I would say we should expect him to perform well at Monza, or in Baku, maybe Vegas, maybe Interlagos. Those are going to be the ones that will play to the strengths that they have here. Places like the Hungaroring, maybe even Zandvoort, are not going to work well for him. Singapore probably won't either. Mexico might. I mean, historically, the Honda was better at altitude tracks, but Mercedes power did catch up in the past, I would say, 5 years. But, yeah, the kind of days that Max needs to have is ones like the Saturday this weekend, or the Saturday at Silverstone. Conditions like what we had today, he was at best third place. But elsewhere, let's briefly talk Ferrari. I mean, Charles Leclerc made the most out of the package, which Lewis Hamilton didn't over the course of this weekend. And what was it? 4th in the sprint qualifying, 4th in the sprint, and then in qualifying for the Grand Prix, 3rd in the race itself, 4th. That was a good run. Or, yeah, in the Grand Prix itself, 3rd even. Yeah, he did do what he could with the car. And it shows that he has made the Ferrari team convincingly his own. I mean, we've known that throughout the first half of the season. Lewis is closing the gap, but it's a bit like the McLarens, really. Which is strange, because I always thought, especially in their time racing against each other, Leclerc was the more emotive of the two on the track. But Leclerc has managed to be clinical and methodical with the way that he drives and the way that he approaches driving in the car. Lewis is getting there. He is getting better. But there's just a couple of mistakes. The reverse entry into the hairpins at the end of sprint qualifying, which saw him knocked out in SQ1. Or using too much of the left-hand curb at Ardennes, which saw him out in Q1. I mean, the drive today was one of your Hamilton drives, right? Started in the pit lane, got 7th. If he had been able to work his way past Albon for 6th, that would be even better. But it tells you how well Albon and that Williams are working. That Albon was able to get 6th, was able to hold off Hamilton, and where was Sainz? I mean, yeah, Sainz did have to do an extra stop, but Sainz was 18th. So it tells you the difference between knowing the team and working around the team and these sorts of newcomers, because Sainz and Leclerc were a lot more even than Albon and Sainz last year. Likewise, Hamilton and Russell were more even than Hamilton and Leclerc this year. But it isn't as simple as, well, that means that Leclerc is better than Russell and Albon is better than Leclerc, because there are so many other factors that come into it. I'll be interested to see what happens when it comes to 2026 and the rules reset. Elsewhere, over the course of the weekend, some drivers that had good Saturdays didn't have particularly good Sundays. I mean, I mentioned Carlos Sainz, who got 6th in the sprint. Of course, we've also talked about Albon getting 6th in the Grand Prix, so there's more points for Albon over Sainz, but Sainz had a good Saturday despite what happened today. Both the Haas's got points, P5 for Ocon and P7 for Behrman in the sprint, which was fantastic form for them. They split the configuration for the rear wing today, with Behrman having a slightly bigger rear wing. And then we end up with Behrman in 11th and Ocon down in 15th, so it shows that there was the way to go, but they didn't make the most of the opportunities that presented themselves. Isaac Hadjar, who was last today, the only car a lap down, got 8th. And meanwhile, Liam Lawson, who was 10th in the sprint and didn't get points yesterday in the Grand Prix today, ends up getting 8th like Hadjar did, but gets 4 points instead of Hadjar's 1. Pierre Gasly picked up a point for 10th today, and Bortoletto was 9th on both days, which got him 0 points yesterday, 2 points today. Well done to Bortoletto, who has shown himself the better of the two Sauber drivers this weekend. And it was a well-planned team game. You could see it with Hulkenberg when he was able to just go, yeah, we'll swap and I'll let Gabriel through, and Gabriel Bortoleto ends up getting more points. It's, like I said, some of it was seemingly quite predictable, but at the same time it was predictable in the way that sometimes it's a bit unpredictable. In terms of the standings, though, it is a McLaren domination, isn't it? 266 points for Piastri, 250 for Norris. That means that it is not guaranteed, but barring any dramas, pretty much guaranteed that Piastri will lead not only into the second half of the season, but past the Hungarian Grand Prix, which historically was the point where the person who was leading the championship goes on to win the championship. They are very much clear of Verstappen, though. We're talking, 81 points Piastri has over Verstappen. Now, granted, that would only mathematically eliminate Verstappen, around Vegas? Around Brazil, Vegas, that kind of time. But it's just in terms of feasibility, right? Verstappen increases the gap over Russell to 28 points. I think that Russell could get that back down, though. Likewise, Leclerc is closing up. He's now 46 points behind Verstappen. That is a gap that is a lot more feasible to cross. Kimi Antonelli spends another weekend at 63 points, whilst Alex Albon gains on him on 54. Lewis Hamilton is between Antonelli and Leclerc, but quite comfortably. He is 46 points over the chassis that he would have been in had he stayed at Mercedes, and 30 points behind his teammate. But what it means in the Constructors' Championship is that McLaren are more than double the points of Ferrari. 516 to Ferrari's 248. Mercedes is in third on 220. Red Bull's in fourth on 192. And that's a shame because Tsunoda did do well in qualifying. And he had been performing well. This is one of his better weekends behind the wheel of the Red Bull. But another weekend without points. And Liam Lawson is now on 16 points to Yuki Tsunoda's 10. Meanwhile, Isaac Hadjar is on 22 points to Yuki Tsunoda's 10. Bless. But it's the way it is in F1 at the moment. Looking further down, Sauber are now 2 points ahead of RB, despite the fact that you get the point scores for both drivers for RB this weekend. Aston Martin is on 36 points, 1 point clear of Haas on 35, whilst Alpine climbs up to 20 points for this season. Anyways, folks, those are my thoughts, those are my feelings, those are my observations of the Belgian Grand Prix. Do you have any thoughts? Let me know them in the comment section down below. Thanks so much for watching and joining, and until next time, it's bye-bye for now.